Hi, I'm Amos Clifford. I'm the founder of ANFT, and I'm going to just talk a little bit today about the lineage of ANFT without going into a lot of detail. I'll just mention right behind me is a place called Granite Basin Lake, and right rising up from it is Granite Mountain. I'm in Yavapai County in Arizona as I'm recording this. Very warm day. You can see reflected in the lake some beautiful clouds, and there's quite a few people out there playing in the lake, so you may be hearing that in the background. So I'm going to just tell a short story of how ANFT came into being. I'll be reading from some notes here, keep me on track, and to keep me brief. Otherwise, I'll go on and on. The story begins around the year 2008. I was in my later 50s, maybe 56 or 57, and so I felt I was coming into my elder years, and I held a question: what could I do with this new emerging phase of my life? How could I move forward in a way that would be of service, that would bring some benefit to the world? So I was really concerned, as many of us are, about this sense that we have that the catastrophe is already upon us. The problems of global climate change are no longer off in the future. We can see that now. This week in California, there have been many high temperature records broken. I was reading last week that in Greece, hikers, tourists are dying from the heat, and the tourism in general is being pushed northward in Europe. We're going to see a lot more effects as this catastrophe continues to unfold. So it felt to me like I would like to do something, and whatever small contribution I can make as an individual. That's what I'd like to do. So my intuition was that for us, for humanity to move through the catastrophe and to learn from it, even to become wiser, we have to remember something. We have to remember that we are nature. In fact, a lot of times I don't use the word nature because we have a kind of a trance. When we hear the word nature, we think, oh, that's out there. Sometimes we'll use the word instead, the more than human world, which kind of helps us feel like we're in the context of something bigger than us. And that change in language is a step towards a relational perspective. So, so we're a part of nature. We're not separate from it. That's just built into the fabric of reality. But the ways in which our cultures shape our perceptions and our ways of knowing induce a kind of amnesia. We forget that we're part of a much bigger whole, and this has made us live in ways that are harmful to the web of life, to the whole of everything. Thus, the catastrophes. We have a foretaste now of much greater impacts to come. So we have to learn to shift our ways of perceiving from being separate from nature to being very much in a web of interbeing with a large family of other sentient beings. And by sentient beings, I include the trees around me, the lake itself, the lake plants, the birds that we can hear in the background, the mountains, all of that. We're in a web of interbeing with all of these other intelligences and sentiences that inhabit this earth that we live on. So part of my question was, how do I help people learn about relationship experientially? Not just talking about it or saying you should know this way, but getting it into the bones so that we actually know it from a place that's in here, not just up here. And not just here, but also in our feet, in the gestures we make, and how we live in the world. How do we make this understanding a constant presence that rings within us like a bell, like the resonance of a great song or a sound? Now, I don't really know how to help to do my part. So this was really a big part of my inquiry for years. I know what has to be done in general terms, but I don't know how to do it. So I held this question for a few years, and the question, it just worked at me. It was like in Kipling's poem where he says, something hidden, go and look beyond the ranges, something lost beyond the ranges, lost and waiting for you, go. That really resonated for me, but I had to grapple with, what does going beyond the ranges mean? What does it mean to go? Where do you even begin on this journey of going? So for several years, while I was holding these questions, I simply tended a small redwood grove. It was owned by a public agency, but neglected, and they didn't really have a plan for it. I would go past several no trespassing signs over a fence to get into the grove and just take care of it, pick up trash. I'd spend hours scraping graffiti off the soft bark of the redwood trees and clean up after parties. And sometimes there would be animals to help. One time I came across a baby deer whose leg was stuck under a branch. I was able to help that out. That all felt to me like part of tending this grove. But a time came when the voices of the trees became very vivid for me. And they said something interesting. They said, we're really happy that you come in here and tend, but we have another thing to ask of you. We ask you to sometimes leave your trash bags at home. Don't come in here to take care of us. Just come in here to enjoy, to just be here. And I got that for the trees and for the grove and the springs and for that place, that a part of the human role in the picture was to enjoy and to appreciate. That was a big teaching for me, that my appreciation of the place was a gift to it, and that its asking for that gift was drawing out a medicine that I had in me that I could carry forward. That was simply the medicine of tending. But I have to say, after that conversation with the trees, I started wondering, well, wait a minute, who's tending who here? I'm thinking of myself as a grove tender, but I think the grove is thinking of itself as a people tender. That's a little snapshot of a piece of my journey toward understanding what relationship with the more than human world means. So over time, my resolve continued strong to find a way forward here. And besides tending the grove, I several times did vision fast ceremonies in the wilds of the Inyo Mountains in California. I did a lot of reading, and every now and then an idea would come to me. And when an idea came to me, first thing I'd do, I'd explore a business plan, a model for that idea, because I knew if it wasn't financially sustainable, it wouldn't be energetically sustainable. So many ideas came and went. I'd pencil them out and do a spreadsheet. No, not that way. That's not the way to go. And then in 2012, there was an article, and it was the cover article on Outside Magazine. It said, "Take 2 hours of pine forest and call me in the morning," by a writer named Florence Williams, who many of you know because of her books. And she's now an ANFT trained guide also. And she described a practice in Japan called shininyoku, forest bathing. And there were some things about it that I really liked, mostly having to do with its accessibility. You don't have to be an athlete. You don't have to go a long ways. You don't have to spend a long time. A 2 to 3 hour visit to a fairly nearby accessible forest, not walking far at all, just being in your senses, being in the place called here and in the moment called now. That's what was required. That really resonated. Plus, there was a bunch of research for it, and I wondered if maybe one channel for reaching more people would be to integrate it into the healthcare system, as they seem to be doing in Japan. Oh man, it's so nice to get this rain. You hear that out there on the lake? That's the music right there. So I got this idea, and I did another business plan, and particularly around the idea of training guides. Because I thought, okay, just as every drop that hits this lake behind me sends ripples out, every guide that we train could ripple every time they guide a group of people. So penciled that out. It looked good. It looked strong, and I decided let's go ahead and let's develop a practice. I didn't really know what the practice of Shinden Yoku looked like, and I didn't have the resources to go to Japan and find out. And so I wove together strands of what I knew from a career that had included wilderness guiding, had included quite a bit of study of naturalist knowledge and ethnobotanical knowledge, as well as primitive skills for what we would call survival skills for living in nature. I'd also worked as a psychotherapist, so in that I had learned quite a bit about communication. That's worked into the ANFT practice somewhat in what we call the language of invitation. And as a guide, taking groups of people into wilderness areas for 3 weeks at a time, I learned what we call the way of the guide, which is a very particular pedagogy. And the pedagogy aims at helping people overcome their self and culturally imposed limitations so that they move beyond the edges of what they think is real and true. And beyond those edges, there's an increased opportunity to remember who we are, what we were born to do. Each of us, what is our particular medicine that we carry. So over the course of about 100 walks, done mostly with mentees, we came up with a pattern that we noticed seemed to reliably produce useful results. And we call that pattern the standard sequence. Think of it as a container that creates a recognizable practice from beginning to end, but within which there's a lot of flexibility and opportunity for the guides to partner with and to be in a creative dance or interaction with the forest, with what's going on around them, with the weather, with the group of people, with the needs of that group of people. So the standard sequence has been used successfully all over the world now in many different settings, in medical settings, in corporate settings, in nature setting, any kind of group that can come. And so after we developed that and got it pretty strong and started the company, Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, in 2014 we did our first training. There were 30 people involved. I think about 8 of those people were just mentees who were on the training team. And we didn't have a super clear idea of what to do, but we did it. And then in short order, we did about 5 more cohorts of trainees, each time really improving our understanding of how to train. But we noticed something. That doing an 8-day training, it eventually expanded to 7 or 8 days of training, wasn't enough. People wouldn't really understand what is the way of the guide or the language of invitation. In fact, it was like we tried to pour so much into those 8 days that it overwhelmed people. And so we did our first big training pivot, which was to offer a 6-month mentored practicum. And in order to become a certified guide, you would have to complete that practicum. And that was much more satisfactory in terms of really transmitting the skills and knowledge. And also really helping people start moving into the heart of the practice. So now we've got, I think we've done about 140 cohorts as I'm recording this. We've trained over 2,500, maybe close to 3,000 guides in at least 65 countries. And we have a team of 20 trainers spread out around the world. And these, I think, are the best trainers, most experienced, and best trained as trainers group that's available in this entire field. And so I'm really proud of that. And one of the things we do to maintain that is every year We all come together from all over the world for a retreat where we exchange information on our discoveries about best practices, but also where we explore the information that's coming to us from the forests, from our practice, and the people we guide, so that we can continue to refine and improve our ongoing understanding. And so now we're seeing a really robust international research movement. When we started, there was research going on mostly in Japan, very little in the United States, some in Korea too. Now you see it all over the world. It's become a, what would I call it, kind of a hot topic in academia. And I'd like to think that we contributed to that because we helped bring this practice out of Japan and into the world and really spread it. And now there's, at the time ANFT started, there was one training organization outside of Japan. Now there's at least 50, a good number of which were started by people who we trained or who were even trainers for us at one time, but who had their own vision. And like in a forest, not all trees are the same. The forest spreads and there's diversity of the way each being in the forest holds its place. And it's that diversity that creates the ecosystem that sustains the forest. I think the same thing is happening when we look at the academics, the practitioners, the entrepreneurs, and the people who are all really involved in this. And so we started a couple of years ago calling our approach relational forest therapy. So if you think back to the beginning of this story, in the very beginning, my idea was it has to do with relationship. We've got to come back into remembering that we are a part of and in a web of relationships, a web of interbeing with every other being in the forest. I was at a conference in Stockholm a couple weeks ago, a forestry conference, and I listened to an academic panel where one of the presenters was advocating for the idea of a new terminology in forestry called relational forestry. And then I looked on one of the other training companies' webpage, and they're using the term relational now in what they're doing. See, I would like to think that ANFT's role as a leader has influenced out there, but that may be the case. But another thing that happens is what we call unearthed dreaming, is that what the earth knows is needed now is somehow within each of us. We come out of the earth carrying some medicine that's dreamed by the earth. And as we become more connected ourselves, as we get to know the trees and the stones and the soils and everything around us, we become much more capable of hearing the messages that the earth is dreaming into us for our lives, for our medicines, for what it is that we should bring. And this is all in what we call the way of the guide, and it's in what we call relational forest therapy. The aim here is to be in the kind of relationship with ourselves, particularly with our own hearts, with the land around us, with each other, where our knowing of our true selves becomes so clear and vivid for us that we move into occupying that knowing with how we live. And this was at the beginning and remains the goal of ANFT. So we'll continue to develop these ideas and to learn from the forest. I finally made it to Japan, I think it was 2017, and was guided by a number of guides there. And in the Nagano area, there's a guide named Koriki. And Koriki-san is one of the most experienced guides in Japan. And he guided us in a beautiful forest up there. And then later we were sitting in the cafe area of a small hotel we were all staying in, drinking whiskey and trading stories. Koriki speaks no English, I speak no Japanese. So we had interpreters. And I told Koriki this. I said, I noticed that there are some similarities and some differences in how this practice has developed here in Japan and how it's developed in North America. And that makes sense to me because the forests in each place have their own voices interacting with the voices or the knowing of the cultures in those places. And so as we learn from the forests shape the practice that we're doing. One of the first big challenges then is for us to learn how to learn from the forests. And that's a continual process, the learning how to learn. So I said that, but before the interpreters could translate it, Koriki started talking. And he talked for about as long as I had talked. And by the time he was done talking, the translators were laughing. We're like, what? What's funny? He said, he just said the same thing that I said. This is a story of two forests or two forest bioregions speaking through two guides who are doing our best to listen to the land. And sometimes I wonder this. Is this whole thing forest therapy that we think we're inventing being dreamed up by the forests to offer us a way to come home? I like that story. So I hope that if you have trained with us with ANFT, that your journey has been good. You enter the lineage. Everyone who does brings their own heart, their own spirit to it, and takes it in their own particular way. And if you haven't trained with us, I hope you will. I hope to meet you all on the trail sometime. And in the meantime, may your journeys through the forest be wonderful and rich and full of love and life. Thank you.